Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's launch webinar for our new report, State of Digital Inequity, Civil Society Perspectives on Barriers to Progress in Our Digitizing World. My name is Sarah Brown-Campello, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at Connect Humanity, and I've been the lead for this project, which is part of the Will for the Web initiative. Before we begin, I want to note that we're recording this call. If you have any questions or comments, you are most welcome to use the Q&A or the chat box to everyone, and we'll try to work questions into the panel or address them in the coming weeks as we continue to explore the report data. Today, I'm going to speak about Will for the Web, this report, and our methodology. Then I'll pass it off to Logica Research. We'll look at some of the data of the report, and we'll have a great panel with civil society experts led by Connect Humanity's co-founder, Chris Worman, and they'll discuss the practical applications of the data. But before we get started, we wanted to acknowledge and say thank you to our partners and our funders on the screen. The networks, resources, and expertise that each of these organizations brought to the project allowed us to develop the largest ever global survey and subsequent report on digital equity. Shout out to MAKAIA and the team at TechSoup who have been such strong knowledge partners throughout this process. A little bit about us. Connect Humanity is a fund for digital equity. We give grants and loans to communities that don't have the internet. We work closely with communities and partners to build the internet infrastructure and skills they need to participate fully in digital society. We especially focus on internet access because it is foundational. You need the internet as a basis to fully develop your digital capacity. That being said, this is just one piece of realizing your full digital potential and taking full advantage of the opportunities that exist in our modern day and age. On the screen, you can see our digital equity framework illustrated in this wheel. Digital equity is a state in which all individuals have the digital access, tools, and skills they need to operate in our digital society. Digital equity is built on these elements, and you will see these icons throughout the report. We focus on this because millions don't have access to the internet and don't have an obvious path towards digital inclusion. This report and the Will for the Web initiatives are vehicles to help CSOs and the people that they serve on that road to digital equity. We are seeking to document our collective digital capacities or lack thereof through our eyes and our voices, the eyes and voices of civil society, and include civil society in finding solutions that we know will work for us and the people that we serve. Half of humanity does not have access to the internet needed to participate in online education, health, business, civic engagement, or work. They're falling behind in our increasingly digital world, and these are the people that we as civil society organizations care about. Our collective right to information and opportunity is compromised by a lack of internet and the other elements that we saw on the screen before. And until digital equity is achieved, governments, philanthropy, and other decision makers will continue to lack data and information needed to make the best possible decisions. The data we have in this report will help us advocate for ourselves and the people that we serve. And as with other rights-based fights, civil society must engage and stand up for those that the market will otherwise fail. Our data shows us that internet access is critical for civil society organizations. On page 16 of the report, you can see just how important it is. CSOs across the board rely heavily on it to work, to fundraise, and to reach the communities that they serve. A few comments on the research approach and methodology. This report highlights civil society's reflections on the digital barriers that they and their communities face. It's a useful mapping highlighting how far or how close people are from that state of digital equity. The report is divided into a few different sections. We have sections highlighting each of those elements of digital equity: Global North and Global South, regional, and a section looking at urban and rural divide. It follows two groups: civil society organizations and the people that they serve. CSO respondents were given the opportunity to answer questions both on behalf of their organizations and on behalf of the people that they serve. The survey was globally and anonymously distributed to CSOs in August and September of 2022. There were over 7,500 responses from 136 countries and 26 languages that were collected. We should mention that this is a digitally forward group of respondents because they did take the survey online and they also had access to the internet. You can download the report from our website, and I can see also Callum is putting links into the chat box for us. We'll show the QR code again at the end of the presentation. And now I'm going to turn it over to our expert data analyst, Lilah Raynor from Logica Research. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and welcome everybody. I'm Lilah Raynor with Logica Research, and I get the opportunity to share some of the findings and data from the study, and just want to reiterate what Sarah said of just how comprehensive and large this survey was. So I'm going to start with this first pillar of infrastructure and access. And on the left, we see that when we look at CSOs and having access to the internet, that's quite strong at 67%. But I want to bring your attention to the right-hand side of this slide. This is about the people served, and just 12% of the people served have access to the internet. It's even lower at 9% for internet reliability and 9% for speed of the internet. So lots of room for improvement there. Let's go on to the next slide. So on this slide, we're continuing on the left here, looking at infrastructure and access, and specifically want to talk about the differences between rural and urban communities. So when we look at internet access in rural communities, it's just at 8%. Still very low in urban communities at 15%, but these are statistically significant differences between those communities and internet access. And then continuing on to the right-hand side of the slide, we're starting to talk about affordability, that second pillar of digital equity. And I want to bring your attention here to the orange numbers on this slide, and we're looking at satisfaction with price paid, and those orange or reddish numbers show us those who disagree that they're satisfied with the price paid, with rural communities at 46%, meaning that the price of internet access is too high, and 34% for urban communities. Again, showing that discrepancy between rural and urban communities. So let's move on to the next slide. And continuing on with that affordability pillar further, here, let's look at just overall the extent of which people can't afford internet access. So that 49% at the top of the slide, that's saying that the survey respondents told us that across the board, they can't afford any of these things that we're talking about here. So moving then from the left to the right here, 2/3 say that internet access is unaffordable for the people they serve. It increases for mobile cellular data plans, then mobile phones, training, tech support, software, and computers, all the way to the right, where 81% of the people served can't afford computers. So again, just about half of people served can't afford any of these things. And then when we look at policy and the pillar for policy on the next slide, here we want to focus on safety online. So many participants we surveyed do not feel safe online, and say that even a larger portion of those they serve do not feel safe online. So focusing here again on those orange and red numbers, 29% of the CSOs feel that they are not safe online, and they report that for the people they serve, 41% don't feel safe online. So definitely public policy implications there. And then I want to talk about the fourth pillar of digital skills, and want to highlight digital literacy and skills building, specifically around training. So again, looking at those red numbers on the left for CSOs, over a third or 37% of CSOs don't agree that they're well trained, and over half or 55% of those served don't have access to training. And the finding that we want to highlight on that fifth pillar, which is around content, is the availability of these specific things in local languages. So the good news here on the top of the chart are those dark blue bars where social media, email, chat services, news and local events. Our participants tell us those are available in local languages. If you start looking down this slide on those light blue bars toward the bottom and middle here, this is what's not as available in local languages. And a question kind of ask yourself and may come up in conversation is, you know, if you look at the middle here, when you're looking at health information, telehealth, and online health information, what happens when just over half of that information is not available in local languages? Or toward the bottom here, government services, online banking, or those civic engagement aspects of voter registration, access to census. So on content, some good news and some mixed news there, and something to think about for local language availability. So that was the last pillar we want to focus on. And again, I'm going to reiterate what Sarah said, and I know the link is in the chat to the report. This is a really in-depth report, and we're just pulling out a few key findings here. On this slide, I want to talk about differences between global north and global south. And in that full report, there's a lot of detail on this slide. And here I'm going to walk through some of the key differences. So starting on the left, we look at the number of employees and the budget for global north and global south. And in the global north, in the red there, you'll see average of 63 employees and $1.6 million for budget. So lower number of employees compared to the global south at 88, but higher budget. So higher budget per employee there. And then the next panel there is people who are agreeing that internet access is critical to CSO's daily operation. So over 90% for both global north and global south, but a bit lower in the global south. And while these numbers look pretty similar, they are statistically significantly different from each other. And that third pillar, or that third panel there, is lack of internet access, tools or skills, limiting the CSO's ability to conduct work. Global North says that that's about 73%, but much higher for Global South. And then that fourth panel, the biggest barrier for CSOs, lack of digital skills in the Global North and internet speed in the Global South. For price paid next, that's 36% are really not satisfied with the price paid in the Global North, but much higher in the Global South. And then finally, that policy aspect of feeling safe online. Again, while these numbers look pretty similar in the Global South, not feeling as safe online. So the last set of data I want to share is on the next slide here, and that's about grant making and fundraising. And overall, of the grant makers who invest in digital equity, most do expect to increase funding in the next 5 years. But there are some differences here. So the big number I want to call out to you is on the left here. It's around digital skills. So you can see that dark blue part, 49%, expecting funding to go more to that area. That 31% toward the bottom of that bar, that's where they're not seeing, that's where they're reporting they're not going to see funding. So most of the funding expected to go increase in terms of digital skills in the next 5 years, but not as much into access to hardware or software, digital rights to internet policy, and access to the internet. And on that last point, we saw how important access to the internet was and how low that is for communities served. So a key area of focus. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and the panel. I know you have an amazing group of panelists here and excited for this next part of the conversation.
Thanks, Lilah. And if I could ask the panelists to join with video, that would be lovely. Welcome, everybody. Before we dive in to some reflections on so what, we want to know where you're coming from. It's incredible to see everybody joining in the chat and sort of letting us know. There's going to be a poll popping up any second now that will, if you could just click on where you are, that would be great. Helps us. Apparently, I can't vote. That's very rude. We'll have to do something about that next time. But if everyone else could vote, that would be great. So I'm very happy to welcome Marnie Webb, Franck Sombo, Rachel, and Catalina to join this conversation today about, again, sort of the so what from some different perspectives, because we want you all to use this information, and these incredible civil society leaders are going to share a little bit about sort of an important takeaway for them, how they might use this work. And I would encourage you to answer the questions that I ask in the chat. We'd love to hear your perspective as well. Since we just ended on a note about philanthropy, why not start with Rachel? Rachel, you come from the Conrad and Hilton Foundation. It's a foundation that many of you know has done a ton of incredible work around the world, but hasn't worked much at this intersection of digital and equity. Certainly no shame in that. We ran a report last year that showed that's pretty normal. Less than 0.05% of all funds, US funds, have gone to this issue, which, with markets failing to serve communities, as Sarah mentioned earlier, limits our pathways to digital equity. Without significant philanthropic engagement in efforts like this to help bring civil society forward, efforts to ensure civil society can engage, I, for one, don't see how we're going to make a lot of progress on this rights-based issue. So, Rachel, thank you for engaging. It's good that you did, and I hope others follow your leadership on that. Question for you, and again, for everyone else here, feel free to answer the question in the chat. I'm curious what your most important takeaway from this report might have been.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And thank you so much for having me on the panel and for Sarah and Lilah for all the information. Absolutely invaluable. So you are right. The Hilton Foundation does not invest in digital equity as an issue area, right? We have some very specific program areas. But what jumped out to me and what it confirmed our rationale for investing in this is that we are really committed to supporting locally led organizations, both domestically here in the United States and overseas. And that digital connectivity and broadband is crucial to us being able to identify those organizations and for them to be able to do their work, right? So it's a truly intersectional issue that cuts across all of the issues that the Hilton Foundation cares most about. And just one small anecdote. So the Hilton Foundation is based in Los Angeles, California, right, where we do also have our own connectivity issues. But I happen to be in Mississippi right now visiting some of our partners. And I was literally just hearing a story from a partner, the Mississippi Center for Justice, who works on issues related to education, along with a host of other kind of cross-cutting services in Mississippi. And she was telling me about a mom in the Delta who has to drive to the next town over and park in front of a library to get free Wi-Fi with her 4 kids for 8 hours a day and sit in her car as they go to school, right? So if you're a funder who cares about education, this is an education issue too. Or if you're a funder who cares about economics, the opportunity to access telework isn't available in that region of the Delta because internet access is so poor. So that's what jumped out to me, just how intersectional and cross-cutting it is, and that gap with the people served. That I think one of the stats that Sarah said is only 12% of many CSOs populations served have access to the internet, and that's just going to impact all of the issues the Hilton Foundation cares about. So, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for calling that out, Rachel. It is something that I think as we've been starting this organization and working with a lot of philanthropies and governments around the world, it's surprising to hear how many times people sort of think this is still a problem. They question that people are unconnected. People are unconnected, and it is affecting all of their work. it is, I think, particularly critical because it's often communities who haven't had a lot of voice politically, historically, who are unconnected and going unheard again. That is not the kind of thing that any of us want to be a part of. So I'm glad that you called out the sort of, it's not just civil society, it's the people we serve. This goes all the way down the, or sort of across the spectrum. Marnie, you lead an amazing organization, a lot of amazing work at TechSoup. For those of you who don't know TechSoup, do yourself a favor, go to TechSoup.global. We could certainly not have done this work without Marnie, Mike Yaton at TechSoup, the team at TechSoup who helped share this out, and all of the TechSoup global partners who helped both translate and disseminate. Thank you so much. Marnie, curious about your takeaway from the report, something that stood out to you.
Yeah, one, thank you for that, Chris, and the opportunity to participate in this panel and to really get in deep into the survey and understand what it means. Like so many of the surveys, there's this huge chunk that's sadly confirming. You know, like it is confirming that the internet is not fast enough, it's not reliable enough, it's not safe enough, and it's not affordable enough for so many of the CSOs we serve and their clients. And I think in that environment, it can be tempting for small grassroots organizations to wait for funders to step into the gap, governments to build infrastructure, foundations to provide more funding that support that. And all of that is, of course, necessary. But what I found myself reflecting on is what can those small organizations do now to support their own access to the internet, but perhaps more importantly, or equally important at least, the access of their clients to the internet, and I think there are three things that they can really concentrate on at this point in time. One of them is to build and use more public access points. Libraries are a fantastic resource. Bring your clients to them, get them so that they trust the library, they trust the computers in the library, and they have reliable access to them. But don't stop there. Put computers in your waiting room if you can. Advocate that local government offices have computers. We just did a design session with a group of folks in the United States, and one of the things that they designed was an information kiosk that would go next to encampments of unhoused people, so they could have some access to basic information and check in on things. And they designed it on the idea of an ATM, a machine from which you get money. Like, if we can dispense cash in public places all over the world, we can likely figure out how to set up internet kiosks, so do more of that. I think organizations also need to be a source of trusted information. While their communities don't have access, it makes it hard for them to get access to trusted information and more likely to fall victims to scams, And so I think and we certainly saw that organizations were often a point of contact for the people they served throughout COVID. So how do they take their role as a disseminator of information, including flyers, and things on pieces of paper out into their community and build those trusted channels with their community members so that they can be an access point for good information. And then finally, representing their communities in public discourse. I think this survey is a great example of doing that because they were asked to answer on behalf of their community, but there are many other ways and places they can bring the voice of their community into public discourse so that the infrastructure and internet of the future is built in a way that as much as is possible includes the community members everywhere.
Thanks, Marnie. Completely agree. Franck, about 18 months ago, Franck planted an idea in my head about how this survey might help communities define and roadmap to digital equity, how it might help us all build community across civil society to share lessons learned. Franck, I apologize, it took me 18 months to get this done, but here we are. So thank you, my friend, for your inspiration, and just sort of curious, what's been your most important takeaway from this?
Thank you very much, Chris, and hi to everyone. It's definitely been quite of a shocking reality that we have to face. It's even more shocking to hear that some funders and governments are not able to realize how huge the gap is in terms of the access to digital resources. And to the list that Marnie just mentioned, I would say that the internet is not available enough, right? And so for me, what stares at me is really the significant gap in terms of where the need is and where the resources are. The result highlighted that we have an overwhelming majority of civil society organizations and the communities they serve who see the internet as critical for their work. And yet, less than 1% of the funding from philanthropy supports access to technology or basically digital equity. That is shocking. In the 21st century, is really shocking, and something must be done about it. And I also believe it's not for any other reason that the United Nations declared that access to internet is a universal human rights. And that must be a compelling call to each and every one of us to realize how fast we have to act now that we have data available. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Callum, some of you will know, or if you don't, you're about to, is our communications manager. Callum, if you have a moment and you haven't, and you could drop a link to that report in the chat about the sort of state of giving, that would be appreciated. If not, I'll get to it in a minute. Thank you, Frank. And I forgot to say, Frank is from WACSI, the West Africa Civil Society Institute, an incredible organization doing work all over West Africa. Catalina, coming to us from a different part of the world, is another inspiration in this work. Catalina and MAKAIA in Colombia have done incredible work connecting extremely remote villages, and I think demonstrating how we can end the digital divide basically anywhere. So, Catalina, what about you? What's been your most important takeaway from this?
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you for Connect Humanity and all the partners to producing this report. I think is amazing that the report focuses on CSOs. Usually we see reports focusing on communities and things like that, but is not very common a report focusing on the state of CSOs around digital equity. So thank you so much for producing it. I think is a huge asset. So I have like two big takeaways. One is gonna sound super obvious, but if we stop making it obvious, it might become mainstream, and is that internet access is a digital right. And if we all raise the voice around that, maybe we can get the message across, because sometimes I feel, what are we doing wrong? Why we are not getting the message across? I mean, being here on the ground in Colombia, trying to find funds for connectivity, for digital skills is so difficult that I hope that this sheds some light around why this is important. So going back to the basic, internet access is a digital right. If we sort of continue saying this, maybe funders and the community are going to believe it, and we're going to do something about it. The other take is something that I've been very vocal about in the last years, is that technology and the internet are meant to reduce gaps, but that's not happening. It's increasing them, because those that have access have better access to information, to faster internet, to reduce costs and things like that. So what's something that was designed to reduce inequalities is actually increasing them. And that worries me. And this report sort of goes in that direction a little bit. And the other big takeaway, I think, aligned to what maybe Rachel and Frank mentioned about the funding world and the foundations, is that, and you mentioned it at the beginning in your opening remarks, digital literacy skills need to be in the agenda of funders, and is not. Again, like at MAKAIA, we're always looking for funds, applying to call for proposals, and it's just not there. And one correlation that I see is that, and this is more like a message for funders, that it doesn't have to be necessarily directly in the grants, for example, but it could be indirectly, to make sure that if it's a project related to health or to education or to whatever topic it is, find a correlation with technology to educate the community with the right digital skills, but also to make sure that the CSO team is also educated and has the right digital skills. And just to finalize, I think this goes back to to something that is a permanent conversation in the grant and grant making community about the cost of overhead and indirect cost. I think that CSOs are sacrificing themselves to make sure that most of the money goes to the community, but they should stop, or we should stop sacrificing ourselves, because this is gonna end up in reduced inequalities and even inefficiencies. So I think this goes back to a larger question in the international grant making community about the importance of dedicating funds in the grants to making sure that CSOs have the right technology and the right skills to be efficient and effective. Thank you so much, Chris.
No, thank you, Catalina, and thank you all for answering that question. And for everyone, again, in the chat, feel free to drop in sort of for you what a big takeaway was. I'm going to move on to a second question. Yeah, we have a report. Okay. But I wake up in the middle of the night worried that it will sit on a digital shelf unused. I also wake up because my 1-year-old is hungry, and then I realize I'm hungry. There's a vicious cycle. But this question that I have for the panelists about how we turn this into action. How are you thinking about actually using this information and sort of taking it forward from here? There have been a couple of ideas that already floated up, but anyone want to jump in? Marnie, I might pick on you first.
Sure. I do think that, when we think about action, we are thinking very specifically. I mean, TechSoup, but we're already committed to trying to lower the access of tech, the cost of technology for organizations all over the world. And how do we more explicitly include digital, access and internet access into what we're doing? How do we partner with groups like the folks that make Endless Laptop and Endless OS, for example, so that we're getting things out that don't just support the organizations, but using that same distribution network to help get out tools that can be devices for the people that those organizations serve. I also think working with community members to set up our community members, which tends to be small grassroots organizations with budgets under $1 million. How can we work with those organizations and our partners like Catalina and Franck across the global network to help advocate for the kinds of things Catalina and Franck were just talking about, right? Like, how do we use the power of this network and the 300,000 organizations that we serve every year to actually be a voice in these policy decisions and these infrastructure decisions? And I don't have an answer to that, but I think what is clear to me from this survey is that we have to answer that question, and we have to come together as civil society and demand more and better infrastructure, and to the points just made, inclusion and equity across that infrastructure, so it's not just better connecting the well-connected.
Absolutely. Franck, do you want to hop in?
Sure. Now we have the reports. What must we do about it? And first of all, is in the right direction to give commendation to Connect Humanity and all partners who have supported this initiative. And I strongly believe that by being able to rally the voices of civil society and the communities we serve, we'll be able to make a difference. So as WACSI, in the region that we serve, West Africa, we intend to voices of civil society in carrying out the message, because this is quite of an interesting research, but I must say the report is quite bulky One of the things that we need to do is to distill the findings of the report in a way that is more digestible. So we will support the efforts that is being initiated in terms of amplifying the message to different channels, social media and other online platforms, as well as during our own engagement, and make sure that we have a strong enough solidarity movement that is created around the issue of digital equity, and that there is also clarity on what digital equity entails. And when we talk about solidarity movement, we are considering engaging with organizations that are already working within the tech space as civil society organizations, but also those who are not within the tech space, but who have interest in supporting and joining such a movement. As a capacity development organization ourselves, we also intend to embed content around building digital skills in our curriculum. That has not been done before. We did have a plan to roll out training on digital literacy in the previous year, but we want to scale it up now to have a broader scale realization of the different facets of what digital equity entails. And we also want to, together with other society organizations, get in the spaces that matter, where we are able to raise the voice of society and engage with government and with the donor community. Donors have not taken into consideration in their funding scheme aspect around technology and digital support. And that is one area that we want to be very vocal about and very deliberate in engaging them to earmark some amounts or percentage of their resources in supporting digital skills development and digital equity for society. And also even having that targeted grants that enable society to engage on digital equity in various ways. So these are a few ways that we intend to engage right by disseminating the findings of the research. Thank you.
Thank you, Franck. Catalina?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I see two actions where I feel that we need to be there. One is that the report briefly mentioned this, but I think it's super important, and is that we need to empower CSOs to become advocates of digital inequity. So it's not an agenda that a few of us should have. It's an agenda that many of us should have. And if we can get CSOs to also raise their voice about why this is limiting their capacity to drive impact, I think that the more voices around, the more we're going to get this message across. As we are also a capacity building organization, similar to what Franck said, we can also include some of this information in our trainings, in our communications, so we can start all talking about this. And the other thing for us directly, I feel that we could talk more, we could advocate more. You know, I was thinking when I was preparing the notes, we got a little bit of tired, like fighting this battle by ourselves, but now we have a whole group that is going to fight with us together. We have an army now. So I feel sort of that my energy is again ready to be doing this, but also we have the data to support it. Maybe we didn't have this data before, and maybe that's why our battle was not a fair ground to fight. But now we have information and we have the tools to do this. And I think that we can talk more to funders, to private sector, to government, to start advocating more to make sure that this really goes into the local, national, and international agendas. Because if it's not there, there's not gonna be the funding for it.
That is unfortunately very true. Thank you, Catalina. Rachel.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I just want to say +1 to everything that Marnie and Franck and Catalina just said. I think that's all absolutely necessary. And as a funder, Catalina, that data is actually really important to me, right? To make that case internally, to say to our leadership, look, this is an issue that impacts everything else we're funding. And then how can I use that to advocate within this sector as well? And I think your idea is also about how can we incorporate that into our day-to-day grant making. I think a really interesting model might actually be how now it's kind of commonplace to include a line item for monitoring and evaluation, right? In every budget, every report, things of that nature. Can we make digital literacy something similar? So I think there's some models to look to, and I think the funding committee community has a big responsibility to take that on and to take that seriously. And to use, and then my second point would be just to, we as an institution also work with some bi and multilateral donors. We have conversations with USAID regularly. So how can philanthropy use this data that Connect Humanity has provided for us to lift this issue even at a higher level? Because foundations, I mean, we feel like we're large, right? We give away so much money. But in the grand scheme of things, we're a small player in the global development space. And so how can we call on our governments to do better? Yeah.
I think that's a great question. And I think one thing that has been extremely clear in all the work that we've been doing for the last couple of years with this organization, and many of you have been doing for years before on this topic, is that we need philanthropy to support exactly this kind of work that helps people see that there are options, that there are alternatives. In the United States right now, as many of you are aware, there's the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, if I'm getting that correctly, that's going to throw $45 billion at bringing people online. Don't get your hopes up. It's not going to finish the job. Long story. But the reason I raise that is because we're in the middle of throwing a lot of money at the problem the same way that we've essentially thrown the money at the problem before. There are some nuances. Things are a little better this time, but there's a lack of imagination that we've witnessed within a lot of the funding community, again, about the options that exist, the options to support small local enterprises who are ISPs, to support cooperatives, to support municipal networks. There's another report on that we commissioned last year that, Callum, I'll call on you again if you might drop that in the chat, about the various models that are out there willing and excited and able to serve the unconnected, to serve people who large telecommunications corporations have, for various reasons, refused to serve. We can't allow ourselves to keep repeating this mistake. We simply can't. It's too critical. And this is exactly where civil society and philanthropy can come together to help sort of build that space, build the reasons, build the pressure, because as has come up a couple of times and it comes up in the report, this is a rights-based conversation. We have rights. The rights will not be given, as no other rights in the past have just happened. They're achieved because civil society fights for them. This is one we have to fight for. So if to the panel, any sort of parting thoughts before we begin wrapping up? There are also, again, people please drop, Zoom has its limitations in terms of how we can do questions and answers, but if you drop questions in the chat, we'll save the chat and we'll try to get back to you, as well as try to answer them through blogs and other things like that. But yes, Catalina.
Yes, Chris, one super quick comment or two. There's an opportunity for TechSoup because of the perception of the cost of software. So I think that if again, we communicate this more, CSOs can know that the cost could be zero. So I think that there's an opportunity, a huge opportunity there. The other, I was surprised. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised, but it's the first time that I see like this statistic around people not feeling safe online. I was a little bit worried about that. And I think that we should also take some action. But that's like one of the big questions, Mark, that I have, not because I doubt the report, actually because the report is giving me the tools to highlight something that I didn't see that tangible before. The thing about this matter about safety online for both CSOs and communities. And I think this is super important as well. That's it.
Absolutely.
And that takes me to conversation around digital security and the synergies that we can build pertaining to this engagement or agenda around digital we have some ongoing work. Currently, we are conducting a research on digital security landscape mapping for West Africa. And this report on digital equity is really timely because it enables us to build some synergy because we are also about to release the report on digital security. So it's really trying to find synergies on how to ensure that not only do we have accessible, affordable, and equitable access to technology, but within an environment that is safe and that gives the leverage to civil society and the community themselves in the most efficient manner. So I think those synergies are also very important for us to build and to advocate so that we are not working in isolation of different pool of conversation. The other startling fact for me is the disparity between the rural versus urban, and then the most privileged versus the vulnerable populations. It's really urgent for us to act on it, not only through advocacy and influencing policy at the government level, but reflecting internally as civil society organization and with our partners around perpetuating some of these inequities or inequalities. There's a research, for instance, from the McKinsey group that suggests that even within the Western cultures, there is some kind of a disparity between the Black community within the environment as opposed to the white community. How do we ensure that we're able to bridge the gap, not only in terms of global norms, our respective regions? How do we ensure that there's a fair balance to access and equity around digital? So that is also very significant for us, and we need to take action on that. Thank you.
That's a good point, Frank. And I saw Janine Abrams-McLean, who's the president of FairCount, joined the call. Faircount.org, amazing organization in the South in the United States. Janine has been a part of our community from very early on. And if you dig deep enough in our website or look on YouTube, you'll see a webinar that we ran about 18 months ago with Janine and a few other leaders from civil society in the United States talking about exactly this, Frank, about the sort of how this inequity plays out on racial and economic terms, as many other inequities do, and how it overwhelmingly negatively impacts people who've already been screwed by our system. So it is a very important thing for us to look at, absolutely. Marnie or Rachel, any quick thoughts?
I just wanted to double click on what you said right there, Chris, because that's really, as I mentioned, I'm in Mississippi, and that's what we're seeing here. The populations that are disenfranchised are either rural and generally Black and lack access because of infrastructure, but even in the urban areas like Jackson, there's an affordability gap for those communities. And so they're not able to access the internet at the same levels as their white counterparts. And then the other, I just wanted to pick up on one question in the account about if foundations aren't focused on digital equity, what are the avenues to get more foundations to include it in their portfolios? I mean, influencing philanthropy is a PhD paper, I think, for someone, because it's hard to do. But personally, my experience is have conversations with your program officers, with the relationships that you do have. I think the more that folks talk about this and its intersectionality and like that it is a foundational right, I think rights-based language can also be very effective in moving philanthropy, are ways to get that conversation started. Because as a few folks have noticed on this call, there's a bit of disbelief almost that the gap is as big as it is. And so making that clear with the data and then the rights-based language would be my recommendation.
Yeah, not just a PhD thesis. I think it's all of our life's work. Marnie?
I'm not sure, what I have to add, except, it's when we look at some of these stats sometimes and we talk about access, we don't also talk about the device people are using. So when you look through the report, you see how often it's a mobile device connecting via, Wi-Fi, which may not be your own, and the unaffordability and lack of reliability of that increases, but also the device itself is not, well suited for robust participation in the digital economy in a variety of ways, And then there's also the place where you're connecting. Are you connecting only in public spaces over public Wi-Fi in ways that are less secure for your information and may actually increase your vulnerability? And depending on where you are and what is prompting that lack of safety, that can be very, very real. That your participation can actually be detrimental. And so how are we training people to participate in this safely and providing tools for people to participate in this safely and countries all over the world? And I think we can't leave out that portion when we're doing our advocacy, so that we are including the safe space, the ability of people to not expose themselves because of what they're doing on their cell phone over a public connection. And I think, Catalina, what you said really resonated with me, because the part about people feeling safe online is so layered, right? Is it about being targeted by the government because you're a digital activist? Or is it because you're a young person in your home looking up healthcare information that may make you vulnerable even inside your own home or your own community?
Yeah, excellent points. Thank you. I think the device access one is a really important thing that people look at in here. The number of people who are accessing digital services via a mobile phone, whether over the Wi-Fi networks or not, whether we like it or not, services are moving online in basically every country in the world. The census in the United States happened the last time online. Have you ever thought about a census form on your cell phone? Your taxes, going to school, applying for healthcare, all of these things that are theoretically accessible through a mobile phone, yes, but they're rarely optimized for use on a mobile phone, much less the cost of data to do so. So the mobile revolution has been wonderful for many, many reasons. It's also not the silver bullet that it is often called out to be. And I think it's important that people look at that in this work. Just because you got a cell phone doesn't mean the job's done. Great step in the right direction, though. So good news, or I guess the bad news, is that, as Catalina raised, unfortunately, digitalization is increasing disparity in a lot of cases because of the sort of thing I just mentioned. And the good news, I guess, is we're all here. We in civil society came together around this report. I appreciate that 7,500 plus organizations isn't every NGO on the world's surface. On the other hand, I'm really excited about that. I'm excited that so many organizations chose to engage in this conversation. It's an incredible start. And it's your turn, civil society. You heard from the panel about how they might use this data. This data is important. It is your insight into the challenges we face. It is your data. It is your voice. And we want you to use it. Because really, as I think we've all said, we have to work together to ensure that our rights to information and internet are realized, to ensure that families aren't left behind simply because of their income or their location as the world goes online. So as important as this data is to me, the fact that, again, we're here in conversation is as, if not more important, so that we can keep learning and working on this together, and we will be in touch. A few things to note. Sarah's going to put up a QR code so you can download the report from our webs, or just go get it from our website, connecthumanity.fund. The link's been in the chat several times. Watch for a coming data dashboard that will allow you to sort of pick the kinds of variables that you find interesting and explore this data for yourself. Thanks to Mike Yaton, who's on the call, and Sarah for helping organize that. Sign up for our newsletter, or just watch our social streams for announcements on that. A couple of other things, we will share this data upon request with people who are able to use it for research purposes. And we have made the survey questions in all of the languages that we used available for any of you to use on your own. So you can go grab them in Word and Excel format to run this survey for your own community. You want to do some advocacy and research, reach out to people who weren't able to take this the first time. Build your own data set, build your own evidence, or just take part of it. You don't have to do the whole thing. I would ask that if you think there are other people who would find this important, please let us know. We're happy to share. And we will be working through a variety of workshops, as you see on the screen here, with folks like you on sort of where we go from here. We've got 3 workshops coming up next week that you can register for to look at sort of how we can best advance digital equity in a variety of ways. So from funding and financing and communications, and sort of, again, more of your vision for what might come of this. Finally, please let us know how you would use this. And if you have reflections or questions, reach out to us. Last thing, thank you, panelists. Thanks to everyone who is involved, all of our partners and funders of this work. Everybody that took the survey. There's an incredible amount of time that was contributed to this work so that we can begin building this community. And a round of applause for Sarah, who brought this whole thing home. Thanks, Sarah. So that's it for today. Thank you, everybody. Please do stay in touch. We will be reaching out.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much,
everyone.
everyone.